Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Global Conversations. Naturally, I'm your host, Andre Darmanin. Funny thing about the beginning of this session with Tiyanda is that she was doing the countdown, and I was worried she was going to pull the same thing that the BBC reporter did from a while ago. But anyway, besides the point. Oh my gosh, we're gonna already have fun today. So today I'm excited to be joined by Tiyanda Kerr, Director of Program Delivery and Social Responsibility at the Ontario Lottery Gaming Corporation. Tiyanda is an advocate for equitable representation and opportunities for all and has been a driving force behind the OLG Corporation's efforts. Her passion for making the world a better and more equitable place where everyone feels a sense of belonging has led her to implement numerous initiatives in her former role of a director of DEI, and that has she's been driving meaningful change within OLG. She does that by connecting through storytelling, leading impactful initiatives, and partnering to accelerate change. So in today's episode, Tiyanda and I will be discussing how racism shows up in our cultures, and I'm definitely looking forward to this conversation because it's something that Tiyanda and I have spoken about previously prior to setting this conversation up. So welcome, Tiyanda.
Thank you, Andre. What a lovely introduction, and I'm sorry for completely throwing you off with it. I wasn't going to do it. I was just trying to be
Hey, but it's timing, right? So why not? So for sure, this is going to be a great conversation. So let's get right into it. I've already done a little bit of a description of you, so let's instead of all that, let's just actually just talk about the first thing is what is something that is unique about you, your career journey, and whatnot.
Well, I love telling this story. In November of 2024, I will have been at OLG for 25 years.
Wow.
I started when I was 2. I'm just kidding. Yeah, it is a very, unique story, I think, in this day and age as people try and find where they're most aligned with their personal values and corporate values and land in an organization. But I started at OLG when I was 24 years old. Of course, everybody figured out my age now. But it was a place that offered me an opportunity to actually interact with so many different people. I have a degree in psychology, and I just fell in love with the gaming industry, and being on the gaming floor was something that I enjoyed. But then, of course, as you grow as a human, you and I were talking before that, I like to learn. I'm always trying to read something or take a course or, that's what makes us the best of humans. We get to grow and learn and become different people. OLG afforded me that opportunity to change different divisions because we're a fairly large organization under the OPS in that we produce the gaming revenue for the province. We have the casinos and C-gaming, lottery. So, in terms of a business, we have human resources, we have our lottery division, we have our social responsibility, we have our finance, audit, compliance, all of these amazing different avenues within our organization. And I was able to jump around and keep that curiosity that I have going. And so I uniquely was able to stay within the organization that I grew up in, doing many different things, and finally landing in social responsibility, where I think is my fit just as a human. After doing EDI for almost 3 years, it was how do I take it further into the business and make the company that has been so good to me better? And so doing it as a part of our responsible gambling strategy has been amazing. So I think if I didn't blab on for too long, that's my unique story that I like to tell.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. I mean, the common theme that we have within EDI in itself is the fact that there is no one profession that is ready for that change, ready for those types of careers. Everyone comes from different backgrounds. Your psychology, myself came from urban planning, which a lot of people don't expect, but there are similarities in the sense of how we build communities. You talk about building, connections and community and within organizations, and how do you make that change organically, typically. So definitely, yeah, we all see those type of changes. And of course, the second thing, which is interesting, that earlier today I had a conversation with someone who, like me, is half Trinidadian. You're Trinidadian. So today is a Trinidad day. So this is a good thing. So it's a good thing. I don't have soca playing in the background, but But anyway.
And it's carnival time. You should have.
And it is carnival time. We're, it's another month. Actually, no, this year it's late.
Last month. Yeah, it's early this year. It's
I thought it was early. I thought it was later. Oh,
no,
okay.
It's early.
Right.
It's the 12th and 13th. It's right before Valentine's Day. Panorama has already started on the island. Yes, the excitement has started.
Yes. And it's better than the weather that we're experiencing here now. So.
I know. Let's not talk about that.
Yeah. But anyway, because we're both in the Greater Toronto area, and so we're experiencing our winters here. And although we've been spoiled for the most part, temperature-wise, not cloud-wise.
Very mild.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
I just like the sun. I'm driven by light.
I think yes. I love the sun too. I miss the sun and I miss the warmth. But anyway, we digress.
We'll get it
and we will. Exactly. So as we've been talking about colorism, like I mentioned earlier, during our conversation before, we talk about racism and colorism between different cultures, but we don't talk about it within our own cultures. And they do show up within the spaces of classism, elitism and whatnot, and as I was saying, God rest my mom's soul, but she would always talk about a different colored Black person. My mother was light skinned, and she would, say some interesting things, but also too within the Trinidadian culture, you will see a different, some sort of, I guess you want to call racism, if you will, between Black folks and the South Asian folks, or Black folks and Asian folks who are from Trinidad, and it carries over to Canadian culture. So I mean, this is something that we don't really talk about within the EDI profession. So let's backtrack for a minute as we're talking about this conversation. From your experience and from your knowledge, how would you define colorism, and how badly has it been felt, especially within the Black community in and itself?
Yeah, no, well, it's all racism's fault. You can blame it on racism. It wouldn't exist, colorism, without racism. But sadly, we have racism. And so as such, there's colorism. And it is plainly that sort of societal framing that we have, that, white is superior. And as such, the different hues of our Black race, the lighter skinned you are, the more like white you are, and therefore the biases that we've had through our experiences of colonialism shows up, and we tend to have a bias towards people who have lighter skin versus dark. And I think within our culture, it is so sad. But for me, specifically speaking, growing up in the Caribbean, it was just a way of life for some reason. It was just this way we were brought up. And the funny thing is my personal story is when you look at my mother and my father and my brothers, I have the darkest skin. And when I moved to Canada and someone called me light skinned, I was just like, I'm sorry, what? I didn't even know what it meant. Yeah. It was not something I kind of experienced in Trinidad. In that, when nobody actually called me light skin, we were treated differently, I think, because of the color of our skin. But me personally, I was just like, it actually cut me to the quick. The first time I heard it, I was so confused. It hurt me. And I actually think that was my first form of racism that I experienced from my own people, basically treating me differently because I was lighter skinned, not understanding that I was, from the eyes of white people, I'm Black. Yeah. And I think colorism is something, like you pointed out, we need to talk about more often. I recognize it as a privilege for myself. because I've been able to, advance my career based on who I am. And I have to recognize that it could be a potential societal bias, and it could be the reason why I've moved up in my career and have been more welcome in spaces where Black people aren't as welcome. So I recognize that as a human being. There's a lot of self reflection you've got to go through, because I sort of felt myself sandwiched in that, I had friends calling me light-skinned and treating me differently. I'll tell you a very personal anecdote, and I won't name names, but if my friends are listening, they'll know who I'm talking about. But I had roommates in university who would joke and say things like, if we were around in the days of slavery, I would be the maid that would be in the house because I have light skin and pretty hair. And I put that in quotes because still to this day I have no idea what pretty hair is. So subjective. But I would fight with them, because I was insulted by the fact that you were trying to make me different with my own people. And I still had to put up with that in society and in the broader part. I always worked full time when I went to school and university as well. I worked full time and I went to school full time. And I had to deal with racism at the casino, and I had to deal with racism when I came home. And so I felt like there wasn't this safe space. Now, in defense of my roommates, we're all in our 20s, we're young. People probably weren't thinking of the impact it would have on a person. But I do challenge our people to look within, see how colorism affects our decisions, and especially how we work in corporate Canada, and call it out as a bias. We should call it out, and we should call each other in, having that conversation, and have open conversations on the fact that it does exist. And how do we, and learn how to talk to one another so we can learn how to break down those barriers. Sorry, I can talk forever. So Andre, you've got to cut me off when you want to ask.
No, this is great, because I was gonna segue into the conversation of my experience, me being mixed race, mixed ethnicity, mixed heritage, however you want to call it, and how I navigated the system, because I, being lighter skinned. Number one, there was the racism part of people calling me half-breed or mulatto or anything like that. Even though back then you don't think about it as being racism, you think about, and we go through those moments like you did when you were in your 20s, with the experiences that you mentioned. But then as I'm changing and navigating careers, one of the things I thought about was the bias part of it, in the sense that because I'm lighter skinned, I'm not accepted by people who are darker than me, who are trying to advance. So it's, so in there, whether you want to call that racial imposter syndrome or imposter syndrome as a whole, those were the things that went through my mind. And that's where I kind of called in myself. And then it's like, hey, did I get into this new position that I'm in because of the fact that I don't look like somebody, or based on the color of my skin? So those are the kinds of questions that I always say to myself and think to myself, that does colorism play a factor because of my, as we call it here, proximity to whiteness, right? Because of the color of my skin. But I'm still fighting for Black equity. I'm fighting for equity, inclusion and all that, regardless of race, gender, and whatnot. So these are the things, it was great to hear your story. And of course, I share my story, having some similarities, but at the same time, this is something that we need to come to grips with as a society of racialized and marginalized folks.
100%. I agree. Yeah. And we have to look at the internal way we show up. We have to look at how our lived experiences affect our outlook today, and unpack that, right? Yeah. Like I took offense to the fact that this light skin title that I was given, but then I unpacked it and realized that there's a certain amount of privilege that came with that as well. And I was able to use my voice, especially in my EDI role, for equity across my organization. And I think that's what you should do. Given the power that you have as an ally, what are you going to do? And so I was an ally for my own people because for some reason, people were okay talking to me. So, okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about race. Why don't we?
Exactly. Why hide behind what's going on and like you said, use it to your advantage, but also show that you are an ally, not just an ally, but also an advocate, right? Because we have both of us have the power, right? So both of us have the power of storytelling, right? This is what we're doing now. This is based on our experiences, and what can people learn from it, right?
Yeah,
so
100%. This is our sphere of influence that we're using. I love it.
Yes, exactly. And so I want to get down to the roots of this, and from the history of this work. We're trying to break down systems of oppression and the colonialism that exists. So, I spoke about it from the perspective of elitism and classism, which is something that we don't even talk about in the profession as much as we should. And so, what are I guess it's more not necessarily what are your thoughts, but also, what's your take on all of that in terms of the colorism, in terms of also why we don't even talk about, classism, social mobility of Black folks, especially, and how all of this perpetrates into what exists today, if you will, within our corporations, if in our organizations.
I think we talk about it. I think we just don't call it out. I don't think we call out colorism, but we talk about anti-Black racism, and within that, we break it down and we mention colorism from time to time. But I think as we become more multicultural, especially in Ontario, especially in Toronto, I think the class conversation is going to start happening because that's something that exists right now in India, right? The color of your skin matters, and it's a big part of their society. And with our new immigration laws and our newcomers to our country, that's going to come here too. And how we need to break it apart as a society to know that, we are opening our doors to all. And as such, that's how we have to break down inequities. And we can't continue that classism way of societal living in Ontario, and we already have our own issues here. So, we can't just layer it in. And I think when you break it down and understand, that racism being a social sort of name that was given by white supremacists, like if you break it down and just think, racism is not a thing, and you start treating people like human beings, I think it'll make it a whole lot easier. But for some reason, society is not there yet. Do you know what I mean? I think we don't treat each other as human beings, and as such, these things happen. Racism is here. Colorism is a part of it because of how racism has unfolded across the U.S. and North America. And I think that we have to work smarter. And I think that if we do it in bite-sized chunks, so for example, when I mentioned our sphere of influence, at OLG, we've got 1,500 employees. I had 1,500 employees listening to different ways of working and making people have a sense of authenticity when they came into work, so that they had a sense of belonging, so that they can do their job. And so in my little sphere, I decided to work on inequities in my own way within the boundaries of my corporation. And I was able to affect some change that way through storytelling, through evidence-based data, bringing research to the forefront, having courageous conversations. And we were able to break it down. And we didn't even talk about colorism, but we talked about racism in the sense that how it disadvantages people of color from getting ahead in the workplace. And I think when we brought it down to that sort of minutia, it became more obvious. And then I said this the other day when I walked into our office just before the holidays. It was so beautiful to see, because we have such diversity within OLG now, with people being heard. Obviously we still have our own growth to do in higher levels of the organization.
Of course.
But generally speaking, we have a great pipeline. waiting
Mm-hmm.
at OLG to learn and grow. Now, getting back to colorism, I think that we have to unlearn, because that's what we do. We learn, we need to unlearn, and then we need to act. And so we were taught for some way. And another thing I always like to put a caveat in there, Andre, is that it's no shame or blame. Fine, I may have gotten a promotion because of the color of my skin, but I'm not going to use imposter syndrome as an excuse. I'm good at what I do. Mm-hmm. And I feel valued. I feel like, I'm worth something when I go to work every day. And so I don't believe that, it was because I was black, I got the EDI job, or because I'm lighter skinned, I'm able to move up in the organization. I personally believe that if it's something that I believe that I am qualified for, that I will go for it. And when I get it, I'm qualified for it and I will do it. And if I make mistakes as a human being, then I make mistakes, but continuously growing, continuously learning, because we want to do better and be better. And I think that when we look at it from that way, that we recognize that we may have biases and we may treat people differently because of the color of their skin, then as human beings, we need to unlearn that and try and unlearn our biases. We can change our brain. Science told us that. Mm-hmm. So we need to unlearn these past misconceptions, these colonial ways of thinking, and recognize that no matter what shade you are still black, and we are proud to be black, and we need to work together to fight fight for racial equality in our workplaces and for our broader society as a whole. Yeah. Did I even answer your question?
Well, yeah, you did. That's what it is, right? We're talking about the the existing system and structures, how it came about and whatnot, right? I mean, that's the most important part. But but I'm saying it again. I think I need a drink.
It's Friday afternoon.
Exactly. It's Friday afternoon that we're recording, so we're okay. Yeah. The thing is, what I'm thinking about as we talked about the same theme of classism is, I'm not sure if you've heard of the book Caste by Isabel Wilkerson.
Yes, I have.
That is probably the best description of how caste and classism intersect, if they will. And it's not, and of course, it's not just talking about South Asian culture, which is now talked about, especially where you are, Peel region, within the school system. Yep. But also too is, how it shows up in our workplaces, right? And this is something that a lot of us don't really talk about in our workplaces, as you mentioned, right? So there's two people that we need to specifically talk about. There are the leaders that currently exist in the organization, and then there are people like you and I who are the leaders within our professions. So, in your experience, what have you done to change that mindset to show that the classism is something that we shouldn't have, the colorism that we shouldn't have within organizations, and how we need to manifest it within ourselves so that it becomes, that we become a more equitable organization, or in your case, or equitable OLG?
It's because I take it from a human approach. That's the difference. Like I tell people all the time, there's different ways we attack equity around the globes, right? Like we have your activists, and then you have your EDI space, and then you have the lawyers who are changing laws and all of these things. And I tell people that my level of influence is within corporate Canada, because that's where I spend the majority of my time. And how I've chose to approach it is in a human way, in this human equity approach. I got that name from a friend of mine, Carlin Purcell, and she and I were on a podcast the other day, and we talked about human equity. And I love that, because what that does is when you put it as human equity, it's putting us all on the same level, because we are all human. and we all want to be treated in our own specific ways. And I think that that's how I approached it at OLG, is recognizing that each and every human being shows up differently. Each and every human being has a different lived experience. Each and every human has a different story. And then I told the Black story from my perspective, from my colleagues' perspective, in that because we couldn't show up 100% of who we were because of bias and how we are treated in broader society, that you're not getting the full Tiyanda at OLG. You still not get it, by the way. I give more of it just because I want other Black employees coming up behind me. I want them to be their true selves. I, unfortunately, been at OLG a really long time. My lived experience is a little different. So I still have a little bit of fear. So I don't 100% show up as myself, but I give a good part of myself and share my stories in order to connect with other human beings to make change. I truly, truly believe that if we want to make a difference in our, well, for me specifically at OLG, is that I needed to connect with individuals. So I would have one-on-one stories. I would tell people, and again, at the time I was being paid as the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Director. And so I was the Black person I wanted you to come talk to. Like, you know how we told everybody, don't just go ask Black people how they're feeling after George Floyd was murdered. Right? Like, but for me, I gave permission to folks, like, you know what, OLG is paying me. You come and talk to me about the Black experience, about how your Black employees are showing up, or et cetera, and let's talk. And I was very surprised to see that a lot of our Black employees were very open about their experiences and what they went through. And people shared on like the smallest of levels, even the fact that, you know, Black women weren't considered professional because they showed up to work with their braids. Like that. I mean, when my CEO heard that, he was just like, are we talking about hair? And I'm like, yeah, we're talking about hair. And it's some little things that let people not show up. And so I think that's what I did. I got down to a personal level. I stripped down a lot of my fear and started telling stories about what it meant for me to be raising Black boys, and the fear as a parent, what that is when you see George Floyd get murdered on your screen and calling for his mother. And so when people saw those connections, they were able to connect with me and say, I get your fear. I get it. And, you know, we had an excellent CEO who had educational, it was part of their performance plan to have EDI education. So we talked about unconscious bias. We talked about anti-racism and anti-Black racism. We had Indigenous awareness training with our leaders. And so it's permeated now from the top down and the bottom up. And everybody's talking, and people aren't afraid to call each other in and say, here's a different way of looking at this. Here's how you made me feel by that comment. And I think those little grassroots things do make a difference. Now, I'm saying this from only my experience with my small 1,500 employees, right? But I do think if you start somewhere small, it eventually grows. I do remember when I was applying for the EDI job, my SVP at the time asked, what would I do about the people who didn't want to move with where OLG wanted to move to, which is a more inclusive, you know, performance-driven culture? And I was very frank. I said, you know, I actually don't care about those people because that's not who I'm trying to educate. If you're stuck in your ways and you don't want to have a more inclusive environment, then you don't belong at OLG, and I'm not going to bother about you. And I'm sure they'll fall up on their own. And trust me, a lot of them did. And then the people who remained are the people who wanted to treat us with humanness, with human kindness. And I know that sounds a little fluffy, but that's how I approach things. I approach things with kindness, just like Martin Luther King. It's about love. Only light will take out the darkness. And so that's where I do it. I just think that there's more people who love in the world than people who hate. And I think we just need to keep motivating the folks who love. And eventually we will permeate through society and we will win.
Great story. See, that's your power of storytelling, right? That's what it is. And as I'm listening to this, to what you're saying, a couple of things came to mind in the sense that, you know, we try and talk about this from a human perspective, and that's I like to call the pragmatic approach to this work.
Yeah. Yes.
And even now within this, within the trying times that we're in globally, if you will, that those it's basically being, I can't think of the term right now, but everything is just all bunched up together between activism and pragmatism. And, that becomes a challenge, especially when we're trying to be more humans in this work. And then it goes to another question, which is kind of the same question that I had in terms of the practitioners themselves. When we're becoming human and we're starting to, and we still see this colorism exist, and what is it that practitioners can do to actually facilitate conversations that we need to remove that bias, that colorism bias from the work that we do, because there's going to be some sort of bias within people, whether they're Black people within who are doing this work, or Asian, South Asian, etc. So there's going to be still that bias. So what do you tell them within our profession that does this work? Because I know that there's some of that involved.
Oh, 100%. And I think what we do as the EDI professionals is we call it out. Yeah. So, I'll call it out. I'll call it out just like I did on this podcast. I recognize that I have a level of privilege with my skin being lighter than my darker skinned sisters. And if I'm on a panel or I'm having conversations, I bring that out, that is a bias within, even as women, you know what I mean? Because we have it, even if you look at that intersection of women and then women of color, white women are the ones on top right now. Women of color are below, much less women of color, and then the shades within women of color. Like, it's just ridiculous. And I think that if we call it out and do it more and more, that, I recognize because of my lighter skin that I might have a different level of privilege than this person over here who has darker skin. Then I think people come to the reality and they start looking and going, oh, I do that. I do have a bias towards, we're criminalized on TV and in the media, and we're seen as some sort of, beasts, the darker skin you have. And I just don't know where that came from. Again, like growing up in Trinidad, because of the variety of hues, I just kind of lived with the difference and never really noticed people. And I mean, I was 14 when I left, so maybe I just wasn't as open-minded as I am now. But I don't think I saw within my class anybody treated any differently. But I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But as it stands now, I am very open to it. I look around and I make sure. But my boss, for example, the VP of Community and Sustainability at OLG, she is a Black woman who is darker skinned than me. And the other VP that I have, Anne Marie, same thing. And so I think that it's people are recognizing that bias could be there for colorism. And I think that people are at least having the conversations within their mind. And I think that when I start educating folks about inclusion, we take out personality, like we take out personal characteristics. It's about the skill set of the job, when we're talking about recruitment, that is. And is the person qualified, right? And so I think I got most of the hiring managers to focus on that at one point as well. And I think that was part of it. Like, when you, some people scrub resumes, so they don't put names, they don't put anything that might make you biased. We didn't go that far, but what we did do was ensure that when we did our job postings, we were asking for only these qualifications. And when resumes came through with those qualifications, that way we were looking at. So there's little things to eliminate the bias so that you see the value of the person in front of you. And I think that's maybe one thing we as EDI professionals can remind folks to do, is to kind of do our best to eliminate bias as much as possible. Because, I mean, we're human beings. We all have lived experience. Of course, we have bias. We have brains. So we have bias. It's not, I'm not trying to eliminate it, but I'm trying to mitigate for it. And here are things you could do. And when you do it, you tend to see the world in a different way with a different lens. And you get introduced to so much difference across our lovely human race. And you become better people. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think I think those are the things we have to do as EDI professionals, is to remind folks of our biases, it's a continuous, right? Yeah. Like, over the last year, because of recession scares, people are cutting their EDI budgets, and they're, eliminating the roles, and the work seems to be not as much in media as it was shortly after George Floyd's murders and Breonna Taylor's murdered and Ahmaud Arbery. And you're like, what's happening? Am I fighting? Am I still fighting? And I think that's what we do really well at OLG, is to remind it that we are on a growth spectrum, and we're trying to do better each time. So even time we hit a goal that we set for ourselves, we want to do another goal, so it doesn't go away. And I think that if we constantly remind folks that bias still exists, this is why we are focusing on our equity, diversity, and inclusion priorities, that we keep going. So I think those are the things that we, as practitioners, we have to do. And then, of course, self-care. We got to take care of ourselves, because the fight's a long fight.
Exactly. I mean, we, myself included, burnout is a big thing in this work.
Yeah.
And yeah, we definitely need to take care of ourselves and take care of one another. And with that, for sure, this was a great conversation, Tiyanda. I learned a lot from you in terms of how you've experienced it. Listen to your story is just as important as the next person's, and it's something that hopefully our listeners and those watching will take heed to, and will be able to embrace and make them be not only better leaders, better employees, but also better EDI practitioners as a whole. So one last question, just to kind of, loosen it up. I mean, although we've been loose in this conversation as it is, I'm loose. You're loose, you're chill, it's the weekend. What is the one go-to song that gets you through the day?
Oh my gosh. So do you remember Destiny's Child, when they were together? There was like this I'm a Survivor song that they put out when they broke up, and it was just the three of them. Yeah. Anytime I need a motivation or that sort of get it done mantra, it's Destiny's Child, I'm a Survivor. I love that song. It just gives me energy. It is but I mean, there's so much wonderful music out there, but that song, if I need a push, I will listen to it. But then I will always be a Whitney Houston fan, and any Whitney Houston song, no matter how sad, how slow, will make me happy, because I love that woman. I miss her.
Yeah, no, those are very inspirational songs to think about, especially, like I said, with the work that we do, and we need to be survivors in this, right? So definitely. So with that, we conclude to another episode of Global Conversations. Tiyanda, thank you for this candid, lovely conversation. Yeah, no, thank you.
And I'm glad that it was fun.
Yeah, no. And, it was kind of random how we went from, hey, we met at a mutual event for Black executives to, hey, let's talk about having a podcast episode. And here we are. So, and this all happened within 7 months of each other. So
I love it. This is why you need to get out there and meet your people, folks. Great people out there to do great things with.
Exactly. And yeah, no, it was, like I said, it's been great that I've gotten to know you over the last little while. And, learning about your experiences and how we can uplift each other. And that's the most important part here. We're not here to fight against each other, but rather uplift. And with that, I thank you, Tiyanda, for this. Exactly. So,
it's my pleasure, Andre. Thanks again.
Exactly. Thank you. So where can people reach you?
I'm on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, came off all social media, but LinkedIn I stayed on because of work. So I'm on LinkedIn at Tiyanda Kerr. I think I'm the only one there because my name's unique. But if you Google me on LinkedIn, you should be able to find me. And Google me. If you do a LinkedIn search, you should be able to find me.
Well, Google comes up too, but there's a lot of other things that that come up, especially with your work. So, definitely, Tiyanda's done a lot of great work with OLG. She has her own little snippet podcast as well. You'll see it online, so check them out as well, because she's got some important snippets for even practitioners to learn from. And with that, I bid you adieu, and thanks again. And until next time, Make sure you subscribe, like, and share our conversation with your fellow colleagues, with the leaders in your organization. So with that, thanks a lot and have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.